Good evening. I'd like to call the City of Post Falls Parks and Recreation Commission meeting for January 26, 2021 to order. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we are limited with seating capacity in here, but for those who are here, silence your cell phones, please. And we'll start with a roll call of the commission members.
Hale.
Present.
Cornwell.
Present.
Zibble Wolf.
Present.
Duzick.
Present.
Noise.
Present.
And do we have any amendments to the agenda?
We do not.
For ceremonies, announcements, appointments, and presentations, the only thing I had was we still have opening for 2 members. So please apply with the city clerk. And we've been looking for a while. We'd love to have a full commission and talk about our lovely parks and recreation department. And next, if there's no declaration of conflict, we'd go to the consent calendar. That would be the minutes from November.
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Second.
Zibble Wolf.
Aye.
Noise.
Aye.
Cornwell.
Aye.
Hale.
Aye.
Duzick.
Aye.
Okay, and moving right along, any citizen issues? We're not really have anyone here, but no comments virtually at all?
No.
Okay. And this is really what we'll talk about tonight is all of our unfinished and old business. Are we going to go in order on the agenda? So first is the Montrose sports field development.
That's not what I have.
Oh, I apologize. I'm looking at this was a pre-agenda agenda. Thank you. Downtown public space feasibility study.
You're just testing me.
I always go off the printed paper.
Testing me as well. I thought I was supposed to be moving up here. Caught me halfway in between here. But, so as directed on the last meeting, I was to come back after publishing the entire plan in the agenda. So this is now before you for an action item. We won't have much of a presentation on this because we did the full presentation in the last meeting. As you know, the downtown public space feasibility study we're coming right at a 2-year-long process since we went to an RFP. So with that, it's ready for your consideration.
So this is what we visited in November. We talked about.
Correct. So any questions that you might have can be answered at this point. Once again, this is really an appendix to the master plan. So it's a framework to help guide us, this and the next one, as we move along, but it doesn't bind you to any particular form. It's simply giving us a working framework to try and make it as efficient as possible as we do look at incorporating those spaces.
I have a couple of questions there, Jim.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the map that was included in the downtown feasibility study on page 29, if anybody else is looking at that as well. And you've got a couple of different areas that are that you've identified as places that we would like to develop. And my concern or question, I guess not so much concern, but questions is in the areas that you have indicated, are we going to need to purchase any more land for this?
So just to make sure we're on the same.
That's the one,
This is
yes.
the map? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
So we have a portion of this that is already city-owned.
Right.
And then we have the Centennial Trail corridor that runs along the edge of that linear park. Adjacent to that is the railroad switching yard. And there's some discussion whether or not some of that may already be under city ownership through right-of-way in the way that railroad came to be. So that's part of the, kind of our staff action plan that we're going to be
Okay.
taking on this, is determining what properties we may or may not already own in those areas and whether or not those can be leveraged to help to form some of this.
Okay.
And then also, as we continue on the process or work with community development in their process of reviewing new developments that come into the area, the smart code zone and our new residential and commercial mixed zones all have an open space dedication requirement. So there could be some potential public-private partnership to be able to make something like this come together. And that's where this gives us the ability to have that conversation with developers and try to find something that could be mutually beneficial.
Okay.
I'd like to point out, too, if you look where the linear park is, that's now being built in apartments. So as the city's growing this fast, some of the spaces that were identified are already gone. Our biggest hope is in the landings area, if that does go in smart code or a PUD or anything, that we can leverage their requirements so that the space that's left there is usable for the public. That's a critical part of this.
Okay,
We buy land, it may be a lot here or a lot there that's identified as a need somehow to either connectivity or to expand on a space or.
okay, okay. And then you did mention community development. So you're working very closely with them, it sounds like.
The best we can, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
As
yeah.
things move along.
But whose budget, I mean, because there was a budget included in this, whose budget does this fall under? And did that budget include any land for purchase?
So we didn't have solid budget numbers we had ranges of numbers for
Yes.
development costs.
Yes.
So because we don't have the land secured, we're not going through a full park plan. We can't
Okay.
dial things in at this point.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
These are those real big, broad strokes. The other piece that this plays into is the potential for an urban renewal district. So this general area has gone through that process of becoming inside the boundary of potential urban renewal. Some of these projects may align with that urban renewal district priorities, either now or at some point in the future. And that's a potential other funding source.
Okay, that was actually one of my questions is the funding source.
Just so you know, majority of any development, if it's not done through the private side, will end up falling under Park and Rec. Planning and zoning doesn't do development.
Right.
Right, right. That's why I guess that's part of why I'm wondering about funding and just, so that would come out of our park.
Impact fees or general fund or park trust,
Okay,
and then sponsorship, donations, grants.
okay. I think that answers all my questions.
Have any other questions? Or comments or anything? Any suggested changes before we take any action? No?
I guess, yeah, and I was going to say, so what action are you specifically looking for today?
We're looking for a recommendation to approve or accept
Accept.
to accept the downtown feasibility study.
So it would be accepted to be added as an addendum to the Park and Rec.
To
Plan.
do a feasibility study, or that this is
This is it.
the feasibility study? I see, okay.
Yeah, accepting the study as presented is.
Oh,
It
okay,
allows us to close out, the contractor is done, and we can move on and start utilizing.
And like you said, it doesn't lock us into anything going forward. It's
No.
just maybe a vision.
It's a vision. It will be used by planning and zoning as they also work with different developers. And as we look at things, it gives us a little bit more leverage in negotiations.
so you are looking for a motion to add this to our master plan?
Correct.
Okay.
You can also just accept it as a planning document for the department. Either way, you can do it. It has the same effect.
Okay.
I'll motion to approve the downtown public space feasibility study and add it to our master plan, I guess.
Okay.
I'll second that. Tuzik?
Aye.
Hale?
Aye.
Noyes?
Aye.
Cornwell?
Aye.
Zibble-Wolf?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next action item is similar, the community center feasibility study.
Correct. So very similar. This one is once again one that we did the full presentation back in November, and we're bringing the document back after being published in the agenda for your consideration. This process kind of got kicked off as a direction from our 2012 Parks and Rec Master Plan to conduct this study to determine whether or not we should look to move on constructing a similar facility to what's been identified and outlined in this plan. So that's the origins of this and how it initiated as an ad alternate to our Park and Rec Master Plan.
And are you looking for the same thing on this particular study?
Yes. Yeah. Either standalone or as an addendum to the Park and Rec Master Plan, either way.
Okay. One of my concerns with this is that in this entire plan, we had talked very specifically about adding some playfields, adult playfields, and I'm not seeing anything in this study that indicates that.
So this was specifically looking at the indoor space, and the only thing that was brought in as it related to outdoor space was a couple of graphics to kind of give scale of what the indoor complex would require, and then also some potential outdoor overflow space that would also leverage or supplement the overall design of a community center. We didn't ask our consultants to provide a concept plan for outdoor adult with this study. So that would be outside of our scope.
Your Park and Rec master plan that you did adopt last year has that identified.
So then, okay, so the master plan has that has the outdoor playfields identified. Does it not also have a community center identified within that?
It simply said that we need to start the planning process on it. Community centers are complicated.
Yeah.
And one of the things we needed to find in this one was a footprint. You know, what actually goes in the building, that's down the road, but from what the community is wanting right now, what type of footprint do we need to set aside? Because as we're seeing, land is becoming a little bit more scarce than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it truly is important on a community center location. So all those things have to become a process of, as we're working on it, how we make that happen. We know from the public on a daily basis, well, before COVID, on a daily basis, we'd have people that were coming into the department new to the area, always amazed that we didn't have a community center. Since then, as we've gone through the COVID issues, we are dependent upon the school district for our gym space, completely dependent. And of course, their protocol is fairly stringent, so we haven't been able to get into the gyms more than a few days this last year. And it makes it evident that ultimately we need to have some of our own gym space and some of that open space. So it's all kind of coming together, and it's just, but this isn't something that's happening overnight. Ultimately, you're probably looking at a bond issue to be able to build a community center.
Mm-hmm. So then the survey questions that you are listing here, those are very specific to an indoor facility, not, even though there are some, I know there's one question, top 2 priorities for the future, there's a lot of outdoor, I mean, it included a lot of outdoor questions, and we got some of those responses as well. So I guess that's what was confusing me was we were asking about top priorities, but yet, and they were allowed to answer, and it didn't specify, so,
This wasn't a separate survey, this is just as part of the master plan needs assessment.
Okay.
So they're just, I think, integrating this data in.
okay, great, that's what I needed to understand.
We didn't, the RRC study that was contracted by Green Play, it wasn't 2 separate studies independent. They asked some
Okay.
questions that lent themselves to identifying these needs within that overarching survey.
That save us some money that way?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that makes sense.
And I'll tell you right now, this is not the cleanest
Yeah.
document, but it's the best we could get through the process with the consultant.
If we would have waited to start this process until after we'd wrapped up the master plan and done this independently, it would have cost an additional $20,000 to run an independent study to produce this document.
Okay, I guess I just wasn't aware that when that study went out, that we were going to use it for something such as this as well. Because had I known that, I believe I would have have you asked a couple of different questions. Because I think just to Dave's point, I don't think this is the cleanest document to utilize for this kind of stuff, for this specific thing.
And I won't disagree with you on that, but I do know that it gives us enough information to pull out so that we can start trying to locate land. And ultimately, we may end up looking at not putting in one big center, but ending up running a couple smaller ones. We have had a conversation with some of the board members of the CROC and looking at, is there a partnership in there? And having this kind of stuff here helps as we're discussing needs and wants and some of the feedback. So it's not wasted. If anything, I think our consultant probably jumped in it deeper into the weeds than they needed to and made it more complicated. They have a passion for rec centers.
Any other questions or comments or? So same thing on this, action item, approve, or whatever else, so.
I'll make a motion to approve the community center feasibility study added to our master plan.
I'll second it.
Noise,
Aye.
Dusick,
Aye.
Hale,
Aye.
Zibble-Wolf,
Nay.
Cornwell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next, we have the Post Falls Landing and Avista, just an update on the project.
Good evening, members of the Park and Rec Commission. Robbie Quinn, Parks Planner, and I'm here to present a couple updates for you. The first one being on the Post Falls Landings project. So just quickly to go over a little bit of background, I know it's been a while since we touched on this. So the landing's located on the end of 4th Street next to Falls Park. Originally, the city had owned about a 1/4 acre parcel right in this area, and then in 2019 the city purchased an additional 1.75 acres outlined in red here to total roughly a 2-acre site. Along with that purchase, the city entered into an MOU with Liberty Bankers, Vista, for the development of the park, in which Vista was going to construct the park, and we would allow them to have access for a crane pad for dam maintenance. So kind of where we're at, Avista had contracted with consultant for the design and construction about 6 or so months ago, and then they had taken this original approved design, done a survey, and kind of looked at the site and needed to tweak a few things to make it fit a little better. At the time when this master plan was approved, it was fairly conceptual and wasn't necessarily an exact fit with what the site contours were. So they presented a 30% design to us about 3 months ago. The estimate along with that was well over budget. And so really, we've spent the last 3 months or so going over kind of scope and budget reductions to get within their budget while, and most importantly for us, maintaining park functionality and programmability. And so kind of a few things that we looked at adjustment, well, really the entire park kind of was some tweaking and adjustment, but the amphitheater shape and capacity has been reduced, hardscape reductions, planting, site furnishings, electrical, all kind of have been reduced to maintain what we can still use, but allow for future expansion as well. And so currently they're planning to present all of these changes in a 60% package tomorrow to the city. And kind of our next steps moving forward, obviously we'll review that 60% design. And then at that point, we'll have to bring it forward to council, update them on all the changes and get their approval and acceptance of the revised design, as well as if there are any additional monies that are going to be needed to make up any sort of gap in the budget. And so depending on what happens there, if that is approved, the proposed next steps for the design team would be a 90% by the end of February, 100% in March, and then they'll be looking at starting construction the end of March and then finalizing in October. So obviously at this point, we don't have any plan to show you. Due to the agreement with Avista, we can't present that to the public at such an early stage when the budget wasn't necessarily settled yet. So at this point, that's all we can really offer you, and us if you have any questions.
I've never really heard the 30, 60%, 90%. What is that? I mean, I think I know what it means, but what is that?
So basically, most designs of this scale will go through various iterations of review and budget refinement. So as you go up in your design detail, your budget becomes more refined, and you have a chance to review things and make adjustments along the way until you get to basically your 100%.
So it's not like you take the 2 acres of the park and you're not saying
No.
50% of it,
No.
we're only doing half. It's
It's essentially the level of detail that's in the design and the refinement of the design, and then ultimately the 100% will be submitted for permits.
A great example of it is with Black Bay. We started at 14 million when it was the rough concept. As we dialed down, here's how we can make adjustments, here's how we bring it in. A lot of those costs, because there's a lot of cushion in there because it's unknown, are tightened in. So they become pretty good numbers. Then we might find that as they went in the topo or they found this issue, it's something that has to be changed and adjusted. So once again, each time you go through, so the idea is when you get to that 100% and you go out to bid, your numbers coming in should be pretty exact.
Yeah. So in this case, because the design consultant and the contractor are essentially the same team, their 100% package and estimate is their bid proposal. At that point, the construction numbers are going to be their contract with Avista.
And on your timeline, we're just advisory, board, but that goes to council first and then comes back to us, or not at all, or?
Yeah, in this situation, unfortunately, it'll go to council, and then due to the timeline, they'll be the ones making the decision on moving forward or not.
Okay.
This is one that's really out of our hands. We have a contract that legal put together in that, the process, so we don't get the same kind of interaction that we do when we have our own consultant, so we look at what's happening, we give input. I get to play bad cop every now and then, but ultimately, this is one that'll come back when we feel that we've got it as tight as we can get, and it's kind of like the final offer. It'll go to council, and it'll be their decision.
You want to have any questions? So this is not an action item?
It's not an action item.
Just update for our information.
And I'm sorry, I might have missed it. Do we have now a timeline, just a tentative timeline going forward? It'll go
They
to
want us-
council?
Likely at the second meeting in February.
They want to start
To
construction
council.
in March.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's
Yeah.
They actually wanted to start it quite a bit earlier, but
good.
it's been an interesting process.
Right, yeah, okay, good. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we have community garden update.
And this is one we have control over.
Alrighty, community garden. So again, just a little background. 2-acre site along 3rd Avenue, just north of Black Bay Park, between the Centennial Trail and adjacent right here to the Black Bay Depot. Primarily native landscaping existing. There's a rec building here and then some garden plots, but other than that, it's mostly a native setting. And so in 2019, BWA developed this master plan, which was approved by the Park and Rec Commission. And in the design, essentially, they're creating demonstration gardens for the public's benefit, educational benefit. So each one of these colors is essentially a different type of planting, and there'd be some sort of educational opportunity at each of these locations, as well as adding trails and additional parking. So once this was adopted, staff kind of took this design and refined it a little bit, making it more efficient, especially in regards to the parking lot. So originally they had 2 separate parking lots, and to create better flow and access through the site, we combined that to one parking lot, and this created a loop, which was beneficial for us in the park, as well as emergency access for the our neighbors, the senior assisted living. And so from there, we contracted with JB for an engineering package, and they provided us with they did a survey and then provided us with grading, drainage, and hardscape design for the parking lot and all the paths, as well as the stormwater calculations for all those. So kind of next steps will be taking those drawings, and we'll start working on kind of the planting design, irrigation design, to create a full construction package. And it'll kind of be set up to be built in phases, essentially, where the planting could be community volunteers or something of that nature, where the design will be there, and it's just kind of when we have money and funds available and people available, they can go in and create some of these spaces. Along the process, there was a couple issues that came up regarding the property line. So in this area, they were a little odd. As you can see, the red was the city-owned property, the blue being Meadowood Glen. And as you can see, their main driveway, the first half is entirely on city property, and the second half is obviously on their property. And so during this process, we went to council and got their approval to create some easements, which would kind of clean up the site and provide better access for us or for them, and allow us to build the parking lot and the loop how we wanted. And so the easements have been recorded, and the city gained them an access easement through our property, and in return they gave us a utility, drainage, parking, and access easement on their property. And so that'll allow us to eventually end up building this parking lot. And so again, essentially the package is complete. We don't at this point have any timeline as far as construction. It's basically just a shovel-ready project when we have the funds available to move forward with it.
Just a quick question. How did we do on the community garden this last year? People utilizing it?
It was full.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
How many plots are there?
We added more of the smaller ones, Brian.
That's what I was going to ask too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
One thing I would really like to do, that came out of the BW, is start the plantings for the orchard, and because that's going to take time, but I think the concept makes it a very unique space then.
So I'm going to give you some rough numbers. Don't quote me on this, but I believe we had 28 or so plots at the beginning of last season. We almost doubled that throughout the last year, largely from some efforts with Mark Jones and the group of kids that he works from the alternative high school. They partnered with us to develop the westernmost portion of that community garden. And those kids worked really hard on cleaning things up and doing some common area maintenance in there as well. I think they'll also be a big resource to making some of these shovel-ready pieces happen when we finally get the bones and the hardscape network in place. They're ready to go on it. I think they'd be moving on it if we just said go for it, but there's some things that we need to get in place ahead of that. So.
And the new design, will it add more spots? I'm a little, because that looks really pretty, so I'm wondering if there's going to be new.
There's room still within the fenced portion of the garden for a few more plots, but largely the space out to the outside of that's going to be demonstration. But
Good.
Mark and his crew, as they're managing those demonstration areas, they do a lot of donation to
Perfect.
the food bank and that sort of thing as well.
And that's the alternative school here in Post Falls, right?
Correct. Yep.
And that, you believe that partnership's going to continue?
It's pretty strong. I think as
Good.
long as Mark is active in the community, I think it's going to be a really strong program. It has proven to be for many years. They previously, prior to this site and their efforts here, they were active in the space that's now behind the depot. And so when they lost their home for that, when we developed the depot, they moved over here and we were able to find a home for them and the efforts for those kids.
Any other questions for Robbie on the community garden? Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
I would like to point out that just finding the ingress and egress issues and negotiating through that and finding resolution with the senior housings board and going through all that took a little bit of work on Robbie's end, and it went very smoothly.
Great.
Looks like it all makes sense. Impact fee update next?
Yeah, it's just, in your packet was included a notice of public hearing for planning and zoning for impact fees. So it's finally moving forward. And over the last probably a month, 2 months, they've had it open for public comment on the final document. The document itself has been reviewed by the city's consultant, staff, our legal. This has been a 2+ year project. I wish it had been done a long time ago, but it's happening. From there, planning and zoning will make the recommendation. Hopefully it goes forward to city council, and then we would see city council see it in March. I wanted you guys to be aware of it, though, so that folks can give express your opinion, you can do it two ways: in writing before the February 2nd deadline, or you can also testify at their Zoom meeting. That has to be done with at least 24 hours prior to that request, prior to the February 9th date of the public hearing. I would encourage you guys to lend your support to this. It's critical, as you saw last time with the timeline for the sports field and everything else. When this
So-
was last done in 2012, we took a pretty big reduction in park impact fees, average of 34%. And that has been a challenge in getting some of the parkland developed in a timely fashion and just moving the number of projects along. So we are looking at an increase. So it is,
So as citizens of the city making comments, we could make comments.
in this, yes. Citizens, but it'll also be developers making comments, realtors, builders, you name it. Anybody who has an interest can make a comment on this.
Is there an invite to that meeting, or
You, on the sheet that I gave you, it has two links on how to
okay.
either send stuff or contact. It's public,
And it's February 9th,
February 9th.
yeah.
But if you wish to speak at it through Zoom, you would have to do it February 8th. I can add up.
I think so,
If you just want to do a written comment on it, that has to be received by them before February 2nd.
Actually, I have a couple of questions, of course. So the new fees, as they're going to present them, what do you know what percentage what increase? The percentage of?
It's substantial. To give you an idea, current impact fees right now are, for multifamily, it's $1,482.83 per unit. It would be jumping up to $2,769.
Is that, but that's not all Park and Rec.
That's Park and Rec impact fees, yes.
That's their Park and Rec's portion of the impact fees.
We don't collect any commercial where Public Works and Public Works and Police, Public Safety collect on commercial. So we only collect on the residential. On
Okay.
the single family, right now there's two fees. There's 16, 25, 77, and for 3 bedrooms or less, 4 bedrooms were 2403. They're being combined, and that would be 3,721. To give you an idea where we were before, there it is.
It's on page 85 of our
Oh, thank you.
agenda.
Thank you.
Right.
I was trying to find it.
In 2011, it went down. In 2012, it went from, 2011 was 2166, and it dropped down to 1,200. So it's a big jump right now, but if you looked at where we were back then, and if we kept the cost of living, we're probably right on track.
Right.
As that was done back then because of the recession, I was told it would be just it'd be reviewed in 3 years, 5 years at the most. We're at 9 years right now.
Yeah.
So the single-family decrease was 68%. The multifamily was, or I'm sorry, not 44%, 44.5%. And the multifamily was a 30.5%. So we took a substantial hit.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I think that people forget is that this isn't us as citizens having to pay this so much as it is. It's new build.
It's new builds.
It's new build. It's not going back and taxing anybody. So it's only those people that are building new buildings that these impact fees apply to. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight is, although this falls within the transportation area, but the is not intermodal, what's the?
Yeah, intermodal.
Is it called intermodal?
Intermodal, multimodal.
Multimodal, that's
It's
what
a
they're
modal.
calling it, yeah. What they're looking to do is connect so many of the different places in our city using these multimodal fees for pedestrian and bike. So what ends up happening is we connect parks. We connect people to the trail, the Centennial Trail. We connect them to the different parks in the area more safely where we have pedestrian and bike routes. So, and that is actually a new fee.
Yes.
That is not, so if you're talking to anybody, that's what those are all about. And I love the fact that we're paying attention to our pedestrian and bike traffic and potentially getting some safer ways to get from point A to point B.
It connects to the schools.
Yep.
The one thing we have seen as we've been working with the Centennial Trail Foundation and looking at our numbers going through and some of these things, especially when we get snow, we hear from it, but the number of people that now commute utilizing those routes is a lot more than you would expect, a lot more than I expected. So that's where it falls under transportation, is because these are being used. They reduce some of the road traffic, you know, so.
Any other questions or anything?
Once again, I just encourage you to express your opinion, or neutral or against are your choices.
Okay, I think that's it with the unfinished and old business. No new business on the agenda, but we do have a few staff reports. Future park developments and windstorm damage assessment.
The future park development really came out of a question that Danny had last time, asking about the Prairie Trail. And I didn't want to just highlight that because there's a lot more things that are coming up on that radar screen for you folks. The first one is Foxtail. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but there is a building boom going on in our region right now. And a lot of these places that were going a little bit slower are now taking off rapidly. And we have been contacted by that developer. They've opened communication with us on the location of the required parkland. They owe the city 8.3 acres of parkland. We will be meeting with them to discuss whether there'll be a cost sharing or what those requirements will be. Obviously, how much we have to build and put in there will determine how quickly we move on it. So that's one of the discussion points that'll be coming up to the developer. This is one that, as it's designed, it will come back before you folks for your review, for your comments on it. We'll look at our minimum standards on the amenities. We'll look at where the needs are. We'll look at all those things as we put it together, and then it'll come back to you guys, and then the final design will be approved by you folks and then on to City Council for their approval. So that's coming forward. Montrose, we have been meeting for a few months on that, on the sports, the adult sports field, the park location. It hasn't really changed, but if it's 50 feet this way, 100 feet that way, those things are being discussed. We're looking at how much additional land we need over what they owe us. Improvement value, so we have gone back in to look at the impact fees that were waived and what that value is to them, so that's been determined. And then working with engineering on where the road system needs to go, because that's kind of held up, you know, some of this where we're going to put the park will depend on where they're requiring, what's the name of the road? Clark Fork. So a lot of moving pieces, but it's our intention to see a plan that's done by the end of the year. And that too will come back to you guys for your review and comments and final acceptance. So that's moving forward. So you'll probably see Mike Terrell and/or Kevin Sneidmiller here at a few of our meetings to discuss some of these things. The Prairie Trail, that's a part of the Highway 41 expansion by the state DOT and the removal of that spur line there. And that this really is an engineering-driven project. We became the money people for it because they don't have those kinds of budgets. And it was critical, we felt, to try and tie into the Prairie Trail that Coeur d'Alene has. So we had set aside when this negotiation started, just an earmark of $600,000 is what we thought it would cost to obtain it's about 11 acres of parkland or trail, whatever. It's now been negotiated by the state DOT with Union Pacific. I think that's Union Pacific, or is that? Yes. And it came in at $366,000. So the timing of the purchase really has to do with when they start the construction and everything. So I'm expecting this year we'll see that come forward. Development of it is down the road. I don't have a timeline on it. We'll have to clear out the rails and the ties. There's a salvage value with that, but we have to work to find the companies that do that. We've heard estimates anywhere from a break even to a making of quite a bit of money. From there, we will utilize state rails grant money. And we've used that on the Centennial Trail quite a bit, so that's a good one. They will also have the Highway District is purchasing a portion of it, and then City of Coeur d'Alene has a small portion to connect in. So once again, this will be a regional effort, which also strengthens it when we go after the grants. Tullamore Park, the sports fields, there's been some limited work. The site, cut and fill, the topo's been done, some of the engineering. We had an issue with the developer adjacent to it. When they're building the road there, Cecil Road, they encroached on our property, told them to stop, but they continued on it. We do have a road base done, but we have some dirt that needs to be addressed. That's been one of the things that Robbie's gotten to work with. Just going through all that. We needed these calculations so I can go back to the Copper Basin and see White and say, here's what's left, here's what we need, and they'll be cleaning up those piles and then doing some of the rough grading. So it'll continue. Our goal is to go after the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant in 2 years. We are submitting right now for Black Bay. So it's every other year is a state side and city side. So we're right on track with all of that. The final thing in here is a dog park. That's been there as one of those things that we need to have one. We have worked with Department of Transportation trying to utilize one of their sites right behind Yokes, have the design, everything. It looks like we're going to get it, then it doesn't. It looks like we're going to get it, then it doesn't, going back and forth. I think at this point, I'm not giving up on that. It really is a good location. The size is critical, but we're going to be bringing forward to you folks a couple options on some of the land we do have and converting it over for that use. We do not want to create a conflict, but we recognize we need to get a dog park out there. I'll be meeting this Friday with Sergeant Harris of the PD. They would like to partner with us and help us on some of the fundraising. I have 2 other donors lined up that are willing to donate towards it. We know we can do some memorial walls and recognition walls and actually generate quite a bit of revenue. the thought is we get this one and we utilize and aim for another one down the road. Land has been the biggest issue. We don't want to go too small because then they become unsightly, they become maintenance issues. We don't want them right up against houses because once again, then you have conflict with the neighbors there, and we're learning from other people's problems and issues. But that will be coming forward this spring. So that's kind of what you have to look forward to for the next year to 2 years.
Any questions for Dave on future park development?
Just a quick one on the Prairie Trail. That goes right up to Highway 41. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there, I know that ITD is doing a lot of improvements to 41. Is it that far out that they're improving? It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are they going to do anything for a crossing there with that trail? No? Darn it.
We tried very hard on that.
I know,
Our
I thought you
engineering
had.
worked hard trying to push it. We've been in lots of meetings. They've told us that if we wish to do it, but it's $1 million for underpass. Overpass is, I think, even more.
Yeah. Okay.
They did bring it forward to the developer of that tech park area because they were one of the ones that really wanted that trail to go to their tech park, but weren't willing to fund that. Now's the time to do it,
Oh, yeah, well, they're,
but ultimately, there will be bike trails on 41, so you're quarter mile from the Prairie crossing, so they can loop down and go across. It's not perfect, but
yeah.
and who knows, maybe once it starts and a new developer comes in and wants this or that, we might see something in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Brian with windstorm damage assessment.
So looks like I'm batting cleanup for the staff reports here, and it's exactly what we're doing after the storm that hit us mid-January. We were impacted somewhat less than our neighboring cities of Coeur d'Alene, Spokane Valley, which is not atypical for us. Our forest is still rather young as it relates to many of our residential neighborhoods and even our parks. So we often don't get hit quite as hard as some of our other areas, but we do in some of our older parks, White Pine, Camille, and Corbin. Those are our hot spots, and that was true again this go around. Also noteworthy, we had an early October storm that resulted in quite a bit of damage as well that we haven't really brought forward. We had more structural damage in the October storm than we did in this most recent storm. Our restroom down at Camille Park took a hit and broke a few trusses and gave us a little bit of cleanup that way. This storm caused some more damage to adjoining properties. We had White Pine had a tree that struck one of the neighboring shops and took out a fence there, and then we had a neighboring property owner who one of their trees fell across the fence out at Kiwanis. So relatively minor as far as structure damage goes for what we've seen on major storm events. But the really unique thing that happened here, and I'm going to take the opportunity to kind of document or talk through what our emergency response is for a storm event. This event evolved throughout the day. Oftentimes we get an event like this and they kind of start to move in overnight. Big windstorm that happens over the evening hours, and we show up in the morning, maybe get a phone call or two from the street department over the evening of kind of giving us a heads up of what's happening. And then we respond to it, go out and do a quick level 1 survey of our facilities, make a documentation of what work we need to do, and get out and accomplish that work. This one continued to evolve as the winds kept going throughout the day, and that caused our staff to have to constantly be shifting and reassessing. Preston received his first call at about 5 a.m. That we had trees down over the roadway, and so that kind of moved us into the priority of, first off, is it safe for us to do any work? If it is, we begin work on that as soon as we can get staff mobilized to address the needs. If it's not, we secure the area, whether that's through the police department or utility provider or city staff, to make sure nobody else gets injured from entering into an area if there's utility lines or such over the downed tree. From there, we'll go, once it's safe, go back in and clean those facilities and make them back available to the public. The next tier beyond that is other city facilities, whether or not those are accessible and functional, and then city park facilities and other natural areas type facilities, so community forest, Camila Park, Black Bay. That's the hierarchy of facilities where we're trying to ensure that we're addressing the needs as they move along. As I said this last time, there were a lot of things changing throughout. We initially surveyed about 15 trees that were down, large pine trees that were down. So we already knew we had about a week and a half worth of work to accomplish. And as the day progressed, we started seeing additional failures. And so that triggered Preston and staff to move through, and we provided in our packet the guide that we provided to our park staff. And this was what we called our quick and dirty field assessment for wind damage. And these are the things we were wanting staff to be looking for as they were moving about throughout the parks. We're looking for soil cracking. If we saw major cracks like this or cracks at the base of a tree, then those are things we wanted to have flagged so that Preston, myself, our lead city arborist could come back and make an assessment and determine whether or not this was something that needed to be addressed immediately or in the very near term. Soil heaving. This is kind of a normal picture of what we see in a park with just roots being established and a root flare off of a tree. This is not something we typically see. And we were finding this throughout the day as that storm continued in and around the day. Again, we're seeing a lean on the tree here with associated soil cracking. So those two things together are letting us know there's something starting to happen underground that we weren't expecting or we don't typically see. Things hanging down, in particular if they're larger than 2 or 3 inches in diameter, or things that are hung up in the tree. These ones our staff is pretty accustomed to looking for as we move around. This is something we have our eyes out for on a daily basis as we're doing our park rounds or cleaning restrooms and that sort of thing. And then excessive lean, particularly if it doesn't have this correction at the top. So this tree is a great example of one where it has leaned, but you're seeing the top of the tree beginning to move back against gravity, and that's something that is pretty typical. Where you have something like this, not so much. And we had a couple of trees that were found to be propped up by other trees, and one of those such trees was up in the White Pine Park area, and we actually had to have a contractor come out while we were in the middle of doing a removal because it was found so late in the day, secure the tree to another tree so we wouldn't lose it into the neighboring house overnight. So we were able to save some citizen property damage as a result of some quick action and great relationships with a contractor locally. So with that, right now we lean heavily on our other departments when these storm events, and it's noteworthy, and we're really proud of the relationships that we have with our street department, our cemetery, and then the way the urban forestry and maintenance divisions are able to work together through these sorts of activities. Kevin, he's at the cemetery, is ready and willing to get the backhoe out and skid logs for us and dig up tree stumps, and the street department, they're hauling stumps to Cannon Hill Industries for us for recycling. And all of that works really, really well. That communication piece is really effective and helps us be productive. But there's no shortage of work, and we fully expect this to be probably by the end of the month. We're going to be mostly locked down with what we know of in our developed areas. But throughout this whole time, we're putting off our normal routine structural maintenance, pruning, and that sort of thing that we happen to do through the winter months. At that point, we're still going to be moving back into our natural areas. We haven't started addressing those other than opening up trails where trees are downed and we know of them. So any public that's out there, we just urge you to be patient as we know we have things that are down over our forested trail areas. We're just working through the process of getting to those. We'll try to open them up either using our parks maintenance staff or urban forestry staff as we can. But we do have to address these leaning hazards and hanging hazards that are in the parks that we already know of. Where there's a little more traffic, and there will be even more traffic here in about a month and a half as the weather starts to turn better. So, but with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have as it relates to storms or.
So is there any method for the public if they identify something? I'm sure you have a lot of this catalog, but is there any preferred method that you want that to happen, or?
A picture with a location emailed to me is excellent. The better the location, even if you can turn on your Google Map or whatever mapping software you use on your phone, and just take a screenshot of that drop pin of your location in the world, that gets us really located into where we're at. So that's very helpful.
Questions? Thank you. Commission comments? Okay. We have no executive session, so we will adjourn.
Thank you.